My stepfather said I was too young to handle $2.7 million. I calmly set down my coffee and smiled. What he didn't know was that I'd been running my own investment portfolio since I was 16, and by the end of this family meeting, they'd discover exactly who they were dealing with. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from, hit that like button, and subscribe, because what happened next will blow your mind. I'm Victoria Chen, 29 years old, and 3 weeks ago my grandfather Theodore left me his entire business empire. The day after his funeral, my mother Margaret demanded I sign everything over to her. When I refused, she declared war. This morning, I received a text about an urgent family meeting. Walking into my childhood home in Ashford Heights, I froze. My mother, siblings, stepfather, and 2 men in $1,000 suits stared at me like predators sizing up their prey. Victoria, my mother said with that cold smile I knew meant trouble. Meet our legal advisors. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about money. It's about a man who built an empire with his bare hands, a family that took his generosity for granted, and the granddaughter he secretly prepared for this exact moment. Theodore Blackwood wasn't just my grandfather. He was my hero. While other kids collected Pokemon cards, I collected his business philosophy. Nothing worth having comes easy, Victoria, he'd tell me, his voice carrying that perfect blend of warmth and steel. But everything worth building starts with a single decision: to never give up. My mother, Margaret, his only daughter, never understood that philosophy. She grew up expecting everything to be handed to her on a silver platter. Even as a child, I noticed how she'd roll her eyes whenever Grandpa talked about building character through adversity. My earliest memories include her explosive shopping sprees. The living room would overflow with bags from Nordstrom, Saks, and Tiffany, followed by hushed but heated arguments about money that would echo through our Ashford Heights mansion. By the time I turned 12, our family finances were in shambles. Mom cycled through credit cards like they were tissues, maxing one out before moving to the next. My stepfather Richard enabled her spending, partly because he benefited from the luxury lifestyle, and partly because confronting Margaret led to screaming matches that could be heard 3 houses down. They remortgaged our house twice before I graduated high school, each time promising it was the last time they'd need help. Meanwhile, Grandpa Theodore took a special interest in me. He noticed how I'd linger in his mahogany-paneled office during family gatherings, fascinated by the financial reports and business ledgers scattered across his massive oak desk. When I turned 13, he started bringing me to his flagship store on Saturdays. "You've got a sharp mind for business, kiddo," he said one afternoon as I helped him review quarterly inventory reports. I just pointed out a discrepancy that could have cost them $15,000. "You notice things others miss. That's not luck. That's instinct." Those Saturdays became sacred to me. He taught me how to analyze profit margins, negotiate with suppliers, and most importantly, how to treat employees with respect and dignity. "Your business is only as strong as the people who run it when you're not there," he'd say, watching me interact with his store managers. "Remember their names, know their families, and they'll move mountains for you." When it came time for college, Grandpa sat me down in his office for one of our serious talks. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across his face as he leaned back in his leather chair. "What are you thinking for your major, Victoria?" he asked, though I suspected he already knew. "Business administration," I replied without hesitation, "with a minor in accounting and finance." His eyes crinkled with pride, the same way they did when he closed a particularly good deal. "Smart choice. Education is the one investment nobody can take away from you, no matter what happens." He offered to pay my tuition in full, but my mother intercepted that conversation. Suddenly, she was calling him daily with financial emergencies. Daniel needed a car for his 16th birthday. Not just any car, but a BMW, because image matters. Isabella had medical bills, though most were for cosmetic procedures she claimed were essential for her self-esteem. There were mortgage payments, credit card minimums, and a vacation to Italy that Margaret insisted was necessary for her mental health. The money earmarked for my education mysteriously became family emergency funds. I took out student loans instead and worked part-time at a local bookstore, shelving novels and business journals while my classmates partied. Grandpa would visit me there, pretending to browse the finance section while slipping me envelopes of cash. "Don't tell your mother," he'd whisper conspiratorially, his weathered hands steady as he pressed the envelope into mine. "This is between us. Invest it wisely." I did exactly that. While my peers spent their part-time job money on clothes and nights out, I opened my first investment account at 18 with Grandpa's secret contributions. By the time I graduated, I'd turned those small gifts into a respectable portfolio worth nearly $40,000. As Theodore's health began declining in his 70s, our conversations grew more serious and purposeful. I was 27 when he was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. During one hospital visit, after the nurses had left us alone with the steady beeping of monitors filling the silence, he gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I've been watching how you handle money, Victoria," he said, his voice quieter than usual but still carrying that familiar authority. "You're the only one in this family who truly understands its value." "I learned from the best," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Margaret," he sighed heavily, and I could see the pain in his eyes. Not physical pain, but the deep hurt of a father watching his child make destructive choices. "Your mother has never understood that money isn't just for spending. It's responsibility, it's security, it's opportunity to build something lasting." He looked directly at me, his gaze intense and clear despite his illness. "I've made arrangements. You'll be taken care of, but Victoria?" He paused, squeezing my hand tighter. "When the time comes, there will be pressure. Family pressure. Standing your ground won't be easy." I promised him I would honor whatever decisions he'd made, though I didn't fully grasp the weight of what he was preparing me for. In his final months, Theodore shared stories I'd never heard before about my mother's teenage years. How she'd stolen money from his wallet to buy designer clothes. How she'd forged his signature on checks, and once completely emptied a college savings account he'd set up for her to buy a sports car she crashed within 3 months. "I failed her somehow," he confessed during our last real conversation, his voice barely above a whisper. "Gave her too much, perhaps, or not enough of what truly mattered. Discipline, consequences, the understanding that actions have real-world impacts." He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. "But you, Victoria, you turned out exactly right. You have something Margaret never developed, strength of character combined with genuine compassion." A week later, he slipped into a coma. 3 days after that, surrounded by family who were already mentally dividing up his assets, Theodore James Blackwood took his final breath. I felt like a piece of my soul left with him. The reading of the will took place 2 weeks after the funeral. We gathered in Mr. Harrison's law office, a wood-paneled room that smelled of leather-bound books and old money. My mother arrived dressed in designer black, a new outfit I'd never seen before, her eyes hidden behind oversized Chanel sunglasses despite the dim interior lighting. Isabella and Daniel sat flanking her like bodyguards, while Richard hovered protectively behind them, his hand resting possessively on Margaret's shoulder. I sat alone across the mahogany conference table, feeling isolated but strangely calm. Mr. Harrison, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, cleared his throat and began reading. The first several minutes covered small bequests, charitable donations, items for distant relatives, a generous pension for Mrs. Chen, his longtime housekeeper who'd been like family to him. Nothing surprising or controversial. Then came the earthquake. And to my granddaughter, Victoria Nicole Chen, I leave the remainder of my estate, including my business holdings, investment portfolios, real estate properties, and all personal effects, with the exception of items specifically designated to others in this document. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. I sat frozen, the magnitude of what had just happened washing over me in waves. $2.7 million, the hardware store chain, the commercial real estate, the investment accounts, everything. Then my mother ripped off her sunglasses, her perfectly made-up face contorting with shock and rage. "This is a mistake," she hissed, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Read it again." Mr. Harrison adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses with practiced calm. There's no mistake, Mrs. Sterling. Your father was very specific and thorough in his instructions. That's impossible. She slammed her manicured hand on the polished table, making the water glasses jump. I'm his daughter, his only child. Mom, please, I whispered, acutely aware of Mr. Harrison's uncomfortable expression and the way his secretary had stopped typing to stare. Don't you, Mom, please me, she snapped, turning on me with venom I'd never seen before. You knew about this, didn't you? You manipulated him when he was sick and vulnerable, playing on an old man's emotions. Isabella jumped in, her voice trembling with what could have been genuine emotion or practiced performance. With her drama background, it was impossible to tell. Grandpa wouldn't do this to us. He loved us all equally. Daniel remained silent, staring at his hands, which somehow made the situation even more uncomfortable. Mr. Harrison interjected firmly, his professional composure intact, despite the chaos erupting in his office. Mr. Blackwood was of completely sound mind when he updated his will 6 months ago. He was very clear about his wishes and the reasoning behind them. My mother's face turned an alarming shade of red. 6 months ago? When he was already sick? This proves it was manipulation. The meeting dissolved into complete chaos after that. My mother threatened to contest the will. Richard made vague but menacing comments about family loyalty and blood being thicker than water. Isabella sobbed dramatically into a designer handkerchief. Throughout it all, I sat in stunned silence, feeling the enormous weight of my grandfather's trust settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. In the parking lot afterward, my mother cornered me against my Honda Civic, her BMW blocking my exit. This can be simple, Victoria, she said, her voice suddenly calm and reasonable, always a dangerous sign with Margaret. Just transfer everything to me, and I'll make sure everyone gets their fair share. I know how to handle large sums of money. I looked into her eyes, so similar to mine in color, but completely lacking any warmth or genuine affection. I need time to process this, Mom. What's there to process? Her smile was sharp and calculating. It's family money. It belongs to all of us, not just one selfish girl who thinks she's better than everyone else. That's not what Grandpa wanted. Her expression hardened instantly. You have no idea what he wanted. I was his daughter for 52 years. You were just a weekend distraction in his old age. Those words cut deeper than I wanted to admit, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'm not making any decisions right now. Don't be selfish, Victoria. Her voice took on that guilt-inducing tone I remembered from childhood. Your brother needs college tuition. Isabella's drowning in medical debt. Richard and I are behind on the mortgage again. I thought you paid off the mortgage with the money Grandpa gave you last year. She waved dismissively, avoiding eye contact. Things happen. Expenses come up. Life is complicated. Like the brand new Mercedes S-Class sitting in their driveway, I thought but didn't say. The next few days brought a relentless barrage of calls, texts, and emotional manipulation that would have impressed a professional interrogator. Isabella called me a greedy witch in our family group chat. Richard left voicemails about doing the right thing and family values. Friends of my mother's, women I'd known since childhood, sent Facebook messages expressing their disappointment in my character. Daniel was the only one who approached me differently. He showed up at my apartment 3 days after the will reading, hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking younger than his 18 years despite his 6-foot frame. I don't care about the money, he said quietly, refusing to meet my eyes. But Mom's gone completely nuclear. I've never seen her like this before. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle, Daniel. I really am. He shrugged, finally looking up at me. Just wanted to warn you. She's not going to let this go, ever. A week later, my mother arranged what she called a casual family dinner to discuss the situation like civilized adults. The moment I walked through the door of our family home, she launched into a carefully prepared speech about family unity and generational wealth. Your grandfather built his business empire for all of us, she insisted, cutting into her filet mignon with surgical precision. He never intended for one person to control everything. Then why did he write the will that way? I asked, pushing my untouched food around my plate. Because you manipulated him, Isabella snapped, her fork clattering against her china plate. We all know you were his favorite. You used that relationship to poison his mind against the rest of us. That's not true. And you know it. Then prove it, my mother said, leaning forward with predatory intensity. Sign the inheritance over to me, and I'll distribute it fairly among everyone. I can't do that. Can't or won't? Richard interjected, his voice carrying a subtle threat. Both. I stood up, my dinner completely untouched. I promised Grandpa I would respect his wishes. His wishes were for the family to be taken care of, my mother shouted as I headed for the door. And I intend to honor that promise, just not the way you're demanding. I left with their angry voices following me down the driveway, knowing I'd just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. That night, alone in my apartment, I cried for hours. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I was losing my family in the process of honoring my grandfather's final wish. The weeks following that disastrous dinner were some of the darkest of my life. What started as direct confrontation evolved into psychological warfare designed to break me down emotionally and force my surrender. My phone became a weapon of constant harassment. Aunts I barely spoke to called to express their disappointment. Cousins sent guilt-inducing texts about family loyalty. Even my mother's church friends reached out, quoting scripture about honoring your parents and the spiritual dangers of greed. Family takes care of family became my mother's rallying cry, repeated in daily voicemails that I eventually stopped listening to. Isabella took a more personal approach, weaponizing our shared childhood memories. Remember when Mom sold her engagement ring to pay for your braces? She texted one morning while I was trying to focus on work. I did remember, but I also remembered that Grandpa had given Mom the money for those braces, which she'd spent on a spa weekend in Napa before being forced to sell the ring anyway. The pressure came from directions I never expected. My mother somehow obtained my coworker's contact information and began calling my office. My boss, Patricia, called me into her office after the third day of these disruptions. "Victoria, is everything okay at home?" she asked, genuine concern evident in her expression. I explained the situation as professionally as possible, grateful when she offered, "Take some personal days if you need them, and I'll have reception screen your mother's calls." Social media became unbearable. My mother and Isabella posted vague but pointed statuses about toxic family members and financial abuse of elders. Distant relatives commented with supportive emojis, never knowing they were taking sides in a battle they didn't understand. I made the mistake of checking my mother's Instagram one evening and found photos of her shopping for a new Porsche. "Treating myself through the grief, self-care blessed," read the caption. This was posted the same week she'd texted me about being unable to afford utility bills. My suspicions about her financial claims grew stronger, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I asked Mr. Harrison for records of my grandfather's financial support to my mother over the years. What I discovered was absolutely staggering. In the 5 years before his death, Theodore had given my mother over $400,000, supposedly for house payments, medical bills, and educational expenses. The amounts had increased dramatically in his final year when he was most vulnerable. "Your grandfather was exceedingly generous with your mother," Mr. Harrison noted diplomatically when he showed me the records. "Some might say excessively so." That night, I received the most disturbing call yet. Richard's voice was slurred with alcohol, his words dripping with barely contained hostility. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he growled into the phone. "Little Miss Perfect with her business degree and her moral superiority." "Richard, you're drunk. Maybe you should—" "Your mother is having panic attacks because of you," he interrupted. "She can't sleep, she can't eat, all because her own daughter is selfish enough to steal what rightfully belongs to her." "I'm not stealing anything. Grandpa left." "We know what the old man did," he laughed bitterly. "But here's what you don't know. Your mother had plans for that money. We put a deposit down on a house in Cabo 6 months ago when the doctor gave us Theodore's timeline." I felt physically sick. "You were spending his money before he was even dead?" "It was going to be ours anyway," he slurred, "until you manipulated a dying old man into changing his will." The call ended with thinly veiled threats about family secrets and legal consequences. I sat in my darkened apartment, shaking with a combination of anger and disbelief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I seriously considered giving in. The money wasn't worth this emotional torture, this constant feeling of being under siege by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Alexander found me like that, curled up on my couch in the dark, clutching my phone like a lifeline. My boyfriend had used his emergency key after I'd missed our dinner date and wasn't responding to texts. "Talk to me," he said, pulling me into his strong arms. All of it. I poured everything out. The inheritance, the family pressure, Richard's threatening call. Maybe I should just give them what they want, I concluded, exhausted by the constant battle. Alexander listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly concerned. When I finished, he took my hands in his dark eyes serious. "Victoria, this isn't just about money anymore," he said gently. "This is emotional abuse, pure and simple. And from what you've told me about your grandfather, giving in would betray everything he was trying to protect you from. But my family is showing you exactly why Theodore made the choice he did." His voice was firm but kind. "He knew this would happen. He was preparing you for it." That conversation marked a turning point in my resolve. Alexander helped me set up an appointment with Catherine Mills, a sharp-minded lawyer who specialized in estate disputes. "Just to understand your options," he insisted when I hesitated. "Knowledge is power." Catherine's advice was crystal clear. Document everything, restrict contact, and prepare for potential legal action. "Based on what you've described," she said during our consultation, "your mother may be planning something more aggressive than guilt trips and emotional manipulation." "What kind of action?" "She might claim undue influence, suggesting you manipulated your grandfather while he was ill. Or she might argue he wasn't of sound mind when he updated his will." "He was completely lucid until his final week," I protested. "I believe you, and the medical records will likely support that. But we should be prepared for any possibility." Following Catherine's advice, I started recording phone calls, legal in our state with one-party consent, and saving all text messages and emails. I installed security cameras at my apartment after finding my mother's car parked outside one evening, engine running, just watching. The emotional toll was crushing, but Alexander's unwavering support kept me grounded. "Your grandfather saw something special in you," he reminded me during my darkest moments. "Trust his judgment." Those words echoed in my mind when, 3 weeks after the will reading, I received a text message that would change everything. "Family meeting tomorrow at 3 p.m. Time to resolve this situation once and for all. Be there." The message sat on my phone screen like a ticking bomb. No please, no question mark, just a cold command that reeked of ultimatum. I showed it to Alexander over dinner that night, pushing my Thai food around my plate without appetite. "She's planning something," I said, stating the obvious. "This isn't just another guilt session." Alexander studied the message, his jaw tightening. "Are you going?" "I don't know." The thought of another confrontation made my stomach churn. Part of me wants to ignore it and hope this all goes away. Another part feels like I need to face this head-on, or it'll never end. "What does Catherine think?" I'd forwarded the message to my lawyer immediately upon receiving it. "She's concerned. Says it has the feel of an ambush, especially given the timing." "What timing?" "The 30-day period to contest the will expires next week." Alexander's expression darkened. "So this could be their last chance to pressure you into a voluntary agreement. Or to gather evidence for a legal challenge," I added, the full implications hitting me. That night, I called Catherine and briefed her on the situation. Her response confirmed my worst fears. "This timing isn't coincidental," she noted. "Victoria, do you have any documentation of your grandfather's intentions beyond the will itself? Letters, recordings, witnesses to conversations where he discussed his estate plans?" I thought carefully, not specifically about the inheritance. But there's William. William Morrison had been my grandfather's best friend for over 40 years. They'd served in Vietnam together, built their first businesses in parallel, and played golf every Thursday until Theodore's health deteriorated. I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral, but if anyone understood my grandfather's mindset, it would be William. "I'll call him," I decided. William agreed to meet me for coffee the next morning. At 78, he still had the ramrod posture and direct gaze of the career military officer he'd been. When I walked into the small cafe, he enveloped me in a bear hug that smelled of Old Spice and brought back memories of childhood visits. You look like him around the eyes, he said gruffly, emotion briefly crossing his weathered face. Theodore would be proud of how you're handling yourself. You know about the situation? He snorted, settling into his chair with military precision. Everyone who knew Theodore knows. He spent the last 2 years of his life worrying about what would happen after he was gone. This was news to me. What do you mean? William stirred his black coffee thoughtfully, choosing his words carefully. Your grandfather made his fortune through intelligence, hard work, and ethical business practices. Watching Margaret squander everything he gave her? He shook his head sadly. It broke his heart in ways you can't imagine. Did he tell you he was leaving everything to me? Not specifically, but about 18 months ago he asked me a hypothetical question. William's eyes crinkled slightly. If I had to choose between giving my life's work to someone who'd waste it or someone who'd use it wisely and build upon it, what would I do? What did you tell him? That it wasn't really a choice at all. A man's legacy should go to someone who shares his values, regardless of blood relation. I swallowed hard. Mom thinks I manipulated him. William's laugh was sharp and bitter. Theodore wasn't a man who could be manipulated by anyone about anything. He was stubborn as a Missouri mule and twice as smart. If he left you his estate, it's because that's exactly what he wanted to do. Do you know if he kept any records explaining his decision? William's expression changed subtly, and he reached into his jacket pocket. As a matter of fact, he withdrew a sealed envelope slightly yellowed with age. He gave me this about 3 months before he passed. Said if there was ever any question about his intentions, I should give it to you. My hands trembled as I accepted the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten in my grandfather's neat, precise script, dated shortly after his diagnosis. It detailed his reasoning for the inheritance decision, his deep concerns about my mother's financial irresponsibility, and his complete confidence in my judgment and character. The final paragraph brought tears to my eyes. Victoria, if you're reading this, it means my fears about Margaret's reaction were completely justified. Stand firm, my dear girl. This decision wasn't made lightly, in haste, or under any influence except my own careful observation over many years. You've proven yourself to be everything I hoped you'd become: intelligent, ethical, hardworking, and compassionate. My legacy isn't just financial. It's about values, principles, and building something meaningful that lasts beyond our brief time here. You're the only one who truly shares and understands those values. I love you all, but you're the only one I can trust with what I've built. I carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope, trying not to cry in the middle of the cafe. Thank you for keeping this safe, I managed. There's more, William said quietly. Theodore kept detailed journals the last few years, documenting every financial request from Margaret, every conversation about money and responsibility. It's all in his safe at the house. I hadn't been to the house since the funeral. The thought of going through his personal belongings had been too emotionally overwhelming. The combination is your birthday, William continued. He told me that specifically, said only you would think to try it. After saying goodbye to William, I called Catherine immediately. This changes everything, she said after I described the letter and journals. Having documented evidence of his reasoning and mental state provides exactly the support we need. What should I do about tomorrow's meeting? Go, but not alone. I'll be parked outside the house. If anything feels wrong or threatening, text me the word help and I'll be inside within 30 seconds. And if they try to pressure me into signing something, don't sign anything. Period. No matter what they say, what they threaten, or how they try to make you feel. Any legitimate document can wait for proper legal review. That afternoon, I drove to my grandfather's house. My house now, though I hadn't been able to bring myself to move in yet. It felt strange using my key, walking through the quiet rooms where so many family memories lived alongside the growing tension of recent years. In his study, I found the safe behind the painting of his original hardware store, exactly where it had always been. The combination, my birth date, worked perfectly, and inside, among insurance policies and property deeds, was the leather-bound journal William had mentioned. As he'd said, it contained meticulous records of my mother's financial requests and my grandfather's increasingly reluctant responses. The entries painted a picture of a generous man slowly realizing that his kindness was being exploited and his daughter was incapable of financial responsibility. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before his death. Gave Margaret $20,000 today for what she claims are Daniel's college preparation expenses. The amount is ridiculous for application fees and test prep, but I'm too tired and sick to argue anymore. This will absolutely be the last time. Final arrangements are completed with Harrison. Victoria will face significant challenges from her family, but she has what Margaret never developed: strength of character, combined with genuine compassion. I pray I've made the right choice for everyone, but especially for the business and employees who depend on it. I photographed the relevant journal entries and sent them to Catherine, who responded within minutes. This is exactly the documentation we needed. Bring the journal tomorrow, but don't reveal it unless absolutely necessary. Let them make their case first. That night, preparing for what I knew would be the most important confrontation of my life, I felt a strange calm settling over me. For the first time since this ordeal began, I wasn't questioning my grandfather's decision or my right to honor it. I was simply determined to face whatever tomorrow brought with the strength and dignity he'd always believed I possessed. Alexander watched me organize my documents: the will, William's letter, key journal entries, and Catherine's business card. "You're different tonight," he observed, sitting on the edge of our bed. "I'm done feeling guilty," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Grandpa made his choice for specific, well-documented reasons. It's time I fully accepted the responsibility that comes with honoring his wishes." He kissed my forehead gently. "Call me the second it's over. I'll be thinking about you every minute." "I know." I managed a small smile. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck," he said with absolute conviction. "You have something better. You're right." As I laid out my clothes for tomorrow's confrontation, my phone chimed with one final text from my mother: "Bring your identification and banking information. We'll need it for the paperwork." The trap was set. All right. But this time, I wouldn't be the one caught in it. The next morning dawned bright and unseasonably warm for October, almost mockingly cheerful for what I knew would be the most difficult confrontation of my life. I dressed carefully in a navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse, professional and composed, channeling my grandfather's boardroom presence, rather than appearing as the emotional target my family expected. Catherine called as I was having my final cup of coffee, my stomach too nervous for breakfast. "Remember the plan," she said. "Stay calm, no matter what they say or do. Emotional reactions can be used against you later if this goes to court." "I'm as ready as I'll ever be. I'll be parked 3 houses down. If you feel threatened or pressured beyond your comfort level, text me help, and I'll be there immediately." My mother's house looked deceptively normal as I pulled into the circular driveway at exactly 3 o'clock. The landscaping was perfect, the windows gleamed, and nothing suggested the emotional warfare about to unfold inside. The only unusual detail was that all the curtains were drawn, odd for a bright afternoon. I took a deep breath, grabbed my leather portfolio containing the documents I'd gathered, and approached the front door. I didn't need to knock. It swung open as I reached the porch, revealing my mother's perfect hostess smile, the one that never reached her eyes and always meant trouble. "Victoria, right on time." Her voice was honey-sweet, another warning sign. She was wearing a designer dress I'd never seen before, her hair freshly colored and styled. Everyone's waiting in the living room. The atmosphere inside was suffocating. Isabella and Daniel sat rigidly on the cream-colored sofa, neither meeting my eyes. Richard stood by the marble fireplace, arms crossed, watching me with undisguised hostility. But what confirmed all my suspicions were the 2 strangers. Middle-aged men in expensive suits seated in the wingback chairs usually reserved for honored guests. "Victoria," my mother gestured grandly, "this is Mr. Wilson and Mr. Daniels. They're helping us sort out this unfortunate situation." I nodded politely but didn't offer to shake hands. I wasn't told this meeting would involve outside counsel. "Not counsel exactly," my mother corrected smoothly, her smile never wavering. "Just advisors to help facilitate the paperwork and make this transition as smooth as possible for everyone." The only available seat was a straight-backed chair positioned to face everyone else, a classic interrogation setup. I took it without comment, placing my portfolio deliberately on my lap like armor. "Would you like some coffee? Water?" My mother was playing the perfect hostess, another performance I recognized from childhood gatherings where appearance mattered more than substance. "No, thank you. I'd like to understand the specific purpose of this meeting." Mr. Wilson, a silver-haired man with calculating eyes, leaned forward with practiced concern. "Victoria, your family is deeply worried about the enormous burden that's been placed on your shoulders. Managing a substantial estate is incredibly complex and stressful, especially for someone your age." "I appreciate the concern," I replied evenly, "but I've been working in financial management for 7 years. I'm quite capable of handling business responsibilities." "Of course you are, sweetheart," my mother interjected with that patronizing smile I'd hated since childhood. "But this isn't just about capability. It's about family unity and honoring what your grandfather really wanted, which was for all of us to benefit from his life's work. If that were true, he would have written his will differently." Isabella spoke up, her voice trembling in what I recognized as her theater voice. She'd been doing community productions since high school. "Victoria, you have to know Grandpa wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. The medications, the pain, the confusion, he wasn't himself anymore." "He was completely lucid until his final week," I countered firmly. "The will was updated 6 months before that, when he was still driving himself to the office every day." Mr. Daniels, the other advisor, opened an expensive leather briefcase with theatrical precision. "We've prepared a solution that honors your grandfather's wishes while ensuring family harmony and financial security for everyone." My mother beamed at him gratefully. "They've been so helpful, Victoria. This way, everybody wins." "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "A voluntary redistribution," Mr. Wilson explained, removing documents from his own briefcase. "You would transfer the business holdings and investment accounts to your mother as the most experienced family member and Theodore's direct heir, while retaining a generous portion for yourself, say 20%. I almost laughed at the audacity. "And the real estate properties?" "Those would be liquidated," Mr. Daniels continued smoothly, "with proceeds divided equitably among all family members. Your brother has significant college expenses approaching, and your sister has ongoing medical needs that require attention." I looked directly at Isabella. "What medical needs do you have that require hundreds of thousands of dollars?" "That's private," my mother snapped, her pleasant facade cracking slightly for the first time. Richard stepped forward, his intimidation tactics as subtle as a sledgehammer. "Look, Victoria, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These gentlemen have also prepared documentation to contest the will if necessary." "On what grounds?" I kept my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Undue influence," Mr. Wilson stated matter-of-factly. "Your grandfather was elderly and seriously ill. You spent an unusual amount of time alone with him during his final months. A probate judge might find that pattern concerning, especially given the dramatic change in his estate planning." The accusation hit exactly as intended, and I felt a momentary wave of doubt. Had I somehow influenced him without realizing it? My mother pressed her advantage, sensing my hesitation. "No one wants a messy court battle, Victoria. Think about what that would do to Grandpa's reputation. To have his mental capacity questioned in public records, his private medical information exposed." The self-doubt must have shown on my face because my mother's expression turned triumphant. "We're just asking you to do the right thing," she continued, nodding to Mr. Wilson, who slid a thick document across the polished coffee table toward me. "Sign this today, and we can put this unfortunate situation behind us. We'll still be a family." Daniel finally spoke, his voice small and pained. "Please, Victoria, Mom says we might lose the house if this doesn't get resolved soon." The manipulation was so transparent and desperate that it actually restored my resolve rather than weakening it. "May I review the documents?" I asked calmly. Mr. Daniels passed them over with a satisfied smile. "Take all the time you need. Everything's clearly labeled and explained in simple terms." I accepted the papers, my expression neutral as I flipped through the pages. As I'd suspected, it was far from the simple redistribution they'd described. It was a complete surrender of everything my grandfather had built, with nothing but vague promises about fair distribution in return. The room fell into tense silence as I continued reading, the only sounds being the ticking of the grandfather clock and my mother's nervous fidgeting with her new diamond bracelet, another recent purchase, I noted. Finally, I closed the document and looked up. 5 pairs of eyes watched me expectantly, like vultures waiting for roadkill. "Well?" my mother prompted, reaching into her purse. "Do you need a pen?" I smiled then. Not the anxious, people-pleasing smile they were accustomed to seeing from me, but my grandfather's smile, the one he wore when he was about to close a particularly advantageous business deal. "Before I make any decisions," I said calmly, "I'd like to understand something. Mom, when exactly did you put a deposit down on the house in Cabo?" Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Richard mentioned it during our last phone conversation. He said you put money down 6 months ago when Grandpa's doctor gave you his timeline." Isabella shot Richard a furious look that could have melted steel. He cleared his throat awkwardly, suddenly fascinated by his shoes. "I never said that. I recorded the call," I replied simply. "Just as I've documented every threat, every manipulation attempt, and every lie about financial hardship while you've been shopping for luxury items." Mr. Wilson straightened his tie nervously. "Miss Chen, family disputes can become quite emotional. Let's focus on the documents and moving forward constructively." "Yes, let's," I agreed, reaching for my portfolio. "I have some documents of my own." That's when my mother stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to steal what should rightfully be mine." "Steal?" I asked quietly, opening my portfolio with deliberate calm. "Like you stole from Grandpa?" "I never." "January 15th of last year. You told him you needed $30,000 for Daniel's medical treatments. I extracted the relevant journal entry. Daniel wasn't sick. The money went toward your Mediterranean cruise and Richard's country club membership." I laid out the documentation methodically, each piece of evidence hitting like a physical blow. "May 8th, you claimed Isabella needed emergency dental surgery. $20,000. Isabella was in Cancun that weekend. She posted the pictures herself." Isabella had the grace to look ashamed, but my mother's face had transformed from shock to pure, undiluted fury. "How dare you, after everything I've done for you? Like using the money Grandpa gave you for my college tuition on spa retreats and designer handbags?" I interrupted, pulling out more documentation. "That's documented too." The 2 advisors were now looking distinctly uncomfortable, exchanging worried glances and whispering urgently. "You ungrateful little," my mother started. I interrupted calmly, gathering my documents, "this meeting is over." I stood with deliberate composure. "Unless you'd like me to call in my actual attorney, who's waiting outside. She's particularly interested in speaking with these gentlemen who are presenting themselves as legal advisors while pressuring me to sign documents under false pretenses." Mr. Daniels closed his briefcase with obvious haste. "Mrs. Sterling, you didn't mention any existing litigation or legal representation." "There isn't any," I clarified, letting the implied threat hang in the air. Yet, my mother's carefully constructed plan was collapsing around her, and the rage in her eyes was unlike anything I'd ever seen. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Actually, it is." I picked up their document and handed it back to Mr. Wilson. "I won't be signing this or any variation of it. Grandpa made his wishes crystal clear, and I intend to honor them completely." "He was my father," she nearly screamed. "Everything he built should have been mine." "That's exactly why it isn't." I replied softly, "He knew what you'd do with it." As I turned to leave, Daniel suddenly stood up. "Victoria, wait." Everyone froze. Daniel had been the silent observer throughout this confrontation, caught between loyalty to our mother and his own growing understanding of what was really happening. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't know about any of this, the lies, the manipulation, the stealing from Grandpa." He looked at our mother, pain evident in his young face. "I just thought Amber was being selfish. But it's not true, is it, Mom?" Margaret's expression hardened. "Sit down, Daniel." "No." His hands were shaking, but his voice remained steady. "I don't want any part of this." To everyone's shock, he walked across the room to stand beside me. "I'm leaving with Victoria." Richard started forward threateningly. "You ungrateful little—" "I'd be very careful about what you say next," I interrupted, holding up my phone. "This entire conversation has been recorded." That stopped him cold. The advisors were already edging toward the door, sensing the legal quicksand they'd wandered into. I looked at my mother one final time, feeling an unexpected wave of pity beneath my anger and disappointment. "Goodbye, Mom." With Daniel beside me, I walked out of the house that had once been my home, leaving behind the elaborate trap that had caught its creators instead. As Daniel and I stepped onto the porch, the front door slammed behind us with such violence that the decorative glass panels rattled. I flinched, but kept walking toward my car, where Catherine was already emerging, alerted by my prearranged signal text. "Are you both okay?" she asked, eyeing Daniel uncertainly. "This is my brother Daniel," I explained. "He's coming with us." Daniel looked between us, confusion evident on his face. "Who are you?" "Catherine Mills, Victoria's attorney." She extended her hand professionally. "I take it the meeting didn't proceed as your mother planned?" A slightly hysterical laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. "You could say that." We didn't have time for detailed explanations. The front door burst open again, revealing my mother, her face contorted with rage that made her almost unrecognizable. "Daniel, get back in this house right now!" Daniel stiffened beside me but didn't turn around. "I can't, Mom. Not after what I just heard." "They're manipulating you," she shrieked. "Everything Victoria said was lies designed to turn you against your own family." Catherine stepped forward slightly, her professional demeanor intact, but her voice carrying steel. "Mrs. Sterling, I strongly advise you to go back inside. Any further harassment will be documented and may significantly impact future proceedings." "Who the hell are you?" my mother demanded. "I'm Miss Chen's legal counsel, and unlike your advisors, I'm actually a licensed attorney with the state bar." That gave my mother pause, though her eyes still burned with fury. Behind her, I could see Mr. Wilson and Mr. Daniels hurrying to their cars, briefcases clutched tightly, rats abandoning the sinking ship. "This isn't over," she repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It is," Catherine countered firmly. "Any attempt to contest the will at this point would be viewed as vexatious litigation. Given the evidence Victoria has compiled, you'd be risking substantial court costs and potential sanctions." My mother's gaze shifted to Daniel, and her expression became almost feral. "And you, don't bother coming back if you leave with her." Daniel visibly flinched but held his ground. "Fine." Without another word, my mother retreated inside, slamming the door once more. The three of us stood in stunned silence for a moment before Catherine spoke. "Let's get out of here. We can talk somewhere else." 20 minutes later, we were seated in a quiet corner of a coffee shop several miles away. Daniel stared into his untouched latte, still in shock. "I can't believe she just disowned me," he said finally. "Just like that." "She's bluffing," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. "She'll calm down eventually." "You don't know that," he countered, finally looking up at me. "You didn't see how she was after the will reading. When you weren't around, it was like she became completely obsessed. The only thing she talked about was getting her money back." Catherine, who had been making notes on her tablet, interjected gently. "Daniel, did your mother discuss specific plans for the inheritance beyond general statements about family sharing?" He hesitated, loyalty warring with his new understanding of the situation. "She had a whole list. The house in Cabo was just the beginning. She wanted to buy into some exclusive country club, get a yacht, completely renovate the house." He paused. "And my college tuition." "Was your education specifically mentioned?" I prompted softly. His eyes dropped back to his coffee. "Once I asked about it directly, she said you were smart enough to get scholarships and that you'd probably try to take over Grandpa's business anyway, so you didn't need financial help." The casual cruelty of it stung but didn't surprise me anymore. "What about your college plans now?" Catherine asked practically. She kept saying not to worry, that once she had control of the money, everything would be taken care of. A bitter laugh escaped him. I believed her. God, I was so stupid. "You weren't stupid," I reassured him. "You trusted your mother. That's normal and healthy." Catherine cleared her throat. "I hate to interrupt, but we need to discuss immediate next steps. The crisis is averted for now, but we should prepare for potential fallout. I nodded, shifting into the practical mindset my grandfather had cultivated in me. What do you recommend? First, file William's letter and the journal entries as supplementary documentation with the probate court. It strengthens your position should there be any future challenges. She made another note. Second, consider a restraining order if the harassment continues. A restraining order against my own mother. The thought was surreal, but after today's confrontation, not entirely unreasonable. Only if absolutely necessary, she qualified, reading my expression. But the recorded threats should be taken seriously. Daniel looked up sharply. What threats? I hadn't told him about Richard's late-night calls or the times I'd found my mother watching my apartment. Some protective instinct had made me shield him from the worst of it. It's been intense, I admitted, but I'm hoping today's confrontation will be the end of it. Catherine looked skeptical, but didn't push. At minimum, change your locks and security codes. And Daniel, she turned to my brother, you'll need somewhere safe to stay. The reality of his situation seemed to hit him all at once. I can't go home. I don't have anywhere else to go. Yes, you do, I said without hesitation. You'll stay with me. The relief on his face was immediate and heartbreaking. Are you sure? Absolutely. My apartment has a pull-out couch with your name on it. Catherine smiled for the first time since the confrontation. That's settled then. Now, Victoria, we should discuss your grandfather's estate. Rosa, have you given any thought to how you want to proceed? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on defending my inheritance that I hadn't fully considered what I would actually do with it. Grandpa wanted me to continue his legacy, I said slowly. Not just preserve it, but build on it. Catherine nodded. The hardware stores are still profitable, but they're facing increasing competition from big box retailers. You might consider diversification. Daniel leaned forward, sudden interest replacing his dejection. Grandpa always talked about expanding into eco-friendly building supplies. He said it was the future of the industry, but he didn't have the energy to overhaul the business model. I looked at my brother with surprise. I didn't know you paid attention to his business discussions. He shrugged, a hint of embarrassment coloring his cheeks. I didn't understand most of it, but I loved listening to him get excited about new ideas. Something clicked into place. Daniel, what are you planning to study in college? Business administration, he replied, with a focus on sustainable enterprise. Why? Because, I said, a plan forming as I spoke, I think Grandpa would want his legacy to include both of us. Daniel's eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm saying that while I won't sign over the inheritance to Mom, I do want to share it in a way that honors Grandpa's values. I reached across the table, taking his hand. How would you feel about an internship at Blackwood Hardware while you're in college? Learn the business from the ground up, like Grandpa taught me. Are you serious? Hope flickered across his face. Completely serious, and if you prove yourself, which I know you will, there could be a permanent place for you in the company after graduation. But what about Isabella and Mom? He asked, though I could tell he was already imagining the possibilities. I sighed. Isabella made her choice today. As for Mom, I won't enable her self-destructive financial habits, but I won't abandon her either. We can set up a modest trust with strict conditions. Catherine nodded approvingly. A properly structured trust would prevent misuse while providing basic security. We can build in educational provisions for Daniel and even Isabella if she ever decides to change her approach. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose. This wasn't just about honoring my grandfather's wishes anymore. It was about carrying forward his values in a way that could eventually heal our fractured family, even if that healing took years. So what happens now? Daniel asked. Now, I replied with newfound confidence, we build something that would make Grandpa proud. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of practical arrangements. Catherine helped Daniel create a list of personal items to retrieve from our mother's house, with a police escort as a precaution. I called Alexander, who immediately offered to help Daniel settle into my apartment. By evening, sitting in my living room with Daniel and Alexander, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The worst confrontation was behind us, and while the path forward wouldn't be easy, For the first time, it felt clear and purposeful. I just realized something, Daniel said suddenly. Today's October 15th. So, it's the anniversary of Grandpa's business opening. 47 years ago today, he opened his first hardware store. I glanced at the calendar, surprised I hadn't noticed. You're right. Do you think he planned it this way? Daniel wondered. Setting all this in motion to come to a head on this specific date? Alexander chuckled. From what you've told me about him, that sounds exactly like something Theodore would do. I smiled, remembering my grandfather's meticulous nature, his belief that timing was everything in business and in life. Maybe he did. His final lesson to us about taking control of our own destiny. Later that night, after Daniel had settled into the pull-out couch and Alexander had gone home, I sat alone in my bedroom reading through my grandfather's journal again. On the final page, after the last entry, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small note in the margin, written in his distinctive handwriting. The true measure of wealth isn't what you have, but what you do with it. Make it matter, Victoria. I traced the words with my finger, feeling his presence as strongly as if he were sitting beside me. I will, Grandpa, I whispered. I promise. The weeks following the confrontation marked the beginning of a completely new chapter, one filled with both challenges and unexpected blessings that would have made my grandfather proud. The immediate aftermath was predictably difficult. My mother launched a brief but furious campaign of text messages, alternating between vicious accusations and tearful pleas for reconciliation. When those failed to move me, she resorted to social media, posting thinly veiled attacks about ungrateful children and family betrayal. I maintained my silence publicly, though each barb stung. Alexander reminded me daily that responding would only fuel the drama. She wants a reaction, he'd say, holding me when the hurt became overwhelming. Don't give her the satisfaction. The hardware stores required immediate attention. Without Grandpa's steady leadership, some managers had grown complacent, and sales were beginning to decline. I took a leave of absence from my marketing job and immersed myself completely in understanding the business operations, visiting each location and learning the specific challenges they faced. Daniel accompanied me whenever his class schedule allowed, soaking up knowledge with an enthusiasm that reminded me powerfully of myself at his age. Watching him interact with employees, asking insightful questions about inventory management and customer retention, I saw glimpses of our grandfather, the same analytical mind, the same genuine interest in people and processes. You're a natural at this, I told him after a particularly productive meeting with suppliers. He ducked his head, pleased but embarrassed by the praise. I just remember things, Grandpa said. It helps me know what questions to ask. That's exactly what makes you good at it. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Isabella reached out unexpectedly. She asked to meet at a cafe halfway between our respective homes. Neutral territory. I arrived first, claiming a corner table where I could watch the door, still wary of potential ambushes after everything that had happened. She entered tentatively, looking smaller somehow, without our mother's commanding presence beside her. The designer clothes and perfect makeup remained, but something fundamental in her demeanor had changed. Thank you for coming, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I was surprised you agreed to meet. I was surprised you called. She fidgeted with her napkin, avoiding my eyes. Mom doesn't know I'm here. She'd be absolutely furious. How is she? Angry. Hurt. Drinking more than usual. Isabella finally looked up. She's selling the house, says she can't afford the mortgage payments anymore. I had expected to feel vindicated by this news. Instead, I felt a complicated mixture of sadness and guilt. Where will she go? Richard's sister has a rental property. It's smaller but decent enough. She hesitated. Daniel's room is still completely untouched. She won't admit it, but I think she's hoping he'll come back eventually. Has she reached out to him? Isabella shook her head. Her pride won't let her. Not yet, anyway. She took a deep breath, gathering courage. I owe you an apology, Victoria. I said terrible things. I believed Mom when she said you'd manipulated Grandpa, that you were stealing what belonged to all of us. You were protecting her, I acknowledged. I understand family loyalty. It wasn't just loyalty. Her voice dropped. I was jealous. You were always Grandpa's favorite, and I resented that deeply. When the will was read, She trailed off, blinking back tears. It felt like final confirmation, I finished for her. She nodded. But these past weeks, watching Mom spiral, seeing how she's handling everything, I've been thinking about why Grandpa made the choice he did. And I finally understand. This admission, so unexpected and genuine, left me momentarily speechless. I'm not asking for money, Isabella clarified quickly. That's not why I wanted to meet. I miss my sister and I miss Daniel. Mom's determined to cut you both off forever, but I can't do that. I reached across the table, offering my hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. Family is complicated, I said, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing. That meeting marked the beginning of a careful reconciliation with Isabella. We agreed to keep our renewed contact private for now, protecting her from our mother's anger while leaving the door open for eventual healing. It was a small step, but a significant one. Meanwhile, the legal aspects of the inheritance were finally settling into a stable pattern. Catherine helped me establish 3 separate trusts: an educational fund for Daniel that would cover his college expenses and provide seed money for future business ventures, a modest monthly stipend for my mother that would cover her basic needs without enabling her destructive spending habits, and a charitable foundation in my grandfather's name, that focused on entrepreneurship education for underprivileged youth. The foundation, in particular, would have pleased Theodore immensely. Throughout his life, he'd mentored young people with business aspirations but limited resources, offering jobs, advice, and occasionally financial backing for promising ventures. Formalizing this support into a structured program felt like the perfect tribute to his memory and values. 6 months after Grandpa's passing, I finally moved into his house, our house now. It was a practical decision. My apartment was too small for both Daniel and me long-term, and maintaining 2 residences made little financial sense. Still, those first nights sleeping in the master bedroom, surrounded by subtle reminders of his presence, were emotionally charged. I kept most rooms exactly as they were, but converted his study into a shared office space for Daniel and me. We hung his portrait above the fireplace, his kind eyes seemingly approving of our changes and new direction. The business began to truly thrive under our combined attention and fresh perspectives. Daniel's research into eco-friendly building materials opened exciting new market opportunities, while my marketing background helped position Blackwood Hardware as the progressive, customer-focused alternative to impersonal chain stores. We began a modest but strategic expansion, opening a specialized green building showroom that attracted younger homeowners and environmentally conscious contractors. The response exceeded our most optimistic projections, validating both Daniel's insights and our grandfather's long-held belief that the industry was ready for innovation. 1 year after the confrontation that changed everything, I received an unexpected email from my mother. The subject line simply read, "Truce." The message inside was brief. "Victoria, I've spent a year being angry and bitter. It hasn't changed anything except making me more miserable. Isabella tells me the business is thriving. She says Daniel is excelling in college and growing into an impressive young man. I miss my children terribly. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. No lawyers, no demands, no manipulation, just talk. Mom." I read it multiple times, searching for hidden agendas or manipulative language, but finding none. After discussing it extensively with Daniel, Isabella, and Alexander, I agreed to meet her at a restaurant with Alexander nearby, just in case old patterns reasserted themselves. She arrived precisely on time, looking older than I remembered but more composed than during our last encounter. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple blouse and slacks. Her expression when she saw me was guarded but not hostile. "Thank you for coming," she said, echoing Isabella's words from months earlier. "How are you, Mom?" "Managing," she offered a small, tight smile. "The rental is actually nice, less to clean and maintain." "And Richard?" "Craig and I are taking some time apart." She hesitated. "Actually, we're getting divorced. It's been coming for a while. Your grandfather used to say Richard brought out the worst in me. I'm starting to think he was right about that and many other things." The acknowledgement, however indirect, that Grandpa had been right about anything related to money or relationships was startling progress. "I've been seeing someone," she continued, eyes fixed on her water glass. "A therapist, Isabella's suggestion. It's helping me understand some things about myself, about why I've always felt so empty inside, no matter how much I acquired or spent. Our conversation that day wasn't a magical reconciliation. Years of dysfunctional patterns and deep hurt couldn't be undone in a single lunch meeting, but it was a genuine beginning, built on honesty rather than manipulation. She asked thoughtful questions about the business, listened without interrupting when I explained the foundation's work, and looked genuinely pleased when I showed her pictures of Daniel's Dean's List certificate and his acceptance into the Business Honor Society. Before we parted, she said something that stayed with me. "Theodore would be proud of you, Victoria. Not just because of what you've accomplished with the money, but because of who you've become despite how difficult I made things for you." It was the most honest and self-aware thing she'd ever said to me. The path toward complete family healing remains long and uncertain. Some days bring genuine progress, others trigger old patterns and buried hurts. My mother and I maintain careful boundaries, but the open hostility has faded into something more like cautious respect. She even attended the grand opening of our newest store location, standing quietly in the back during my speech, but staying for cake and congratulations afterward. It was a small gesture, but meaningful. Daniel graduates next spring, ready to step into a full-time leadership role in the company. His senior thesis on sustainable business practices in traditional industries has already attracted attention from industry publications and potential business partners. Isabella, inspired perhaps by the foundation's community work, has begun volunteering at a women's shelter and seriously considering returning to school for social work. She talks about wanting to help people rebuild their lives after financial abuse and family trauma, a mission that feels deeply personal and important. And Alexander, well, the engagement ring he placed on my finger 3 months ago suggests we'll be building our future together, combining his engineering expertise with my business acumen in ways that would have fascinated my grandfather. As for me, I finally made complete peace with Theodore's choice and the responsibility it placed on my shoulders. The inheritance wasn't just about money or business acumen. It was about values, about building rather than consuming, about using resources to create something meaningful that outlasts our brief time here. In his journal's final entry, Grandpa wrote that he believed I had what my mother never developed: strength of character. For a long time, that felt like impossibly heavy praise to live up to. Now I understand it wasn't meant as pressure, but as recognition of something he'd observed over years of watching me grow and make choices, often difficult ones. Standing up to family pressure and manipulation was the hardest thing I've ever done. But through that painful process, I discovered my own capacity for both firmness and compassion, for honoring the past while building something entirely new and better. That's the real inheritance Theodore left me. Not the money or the business empire, but the understanding that true wealth lies in what we create, what we share, and what we leave behind for others to build upon. If you're facing a similar family conflict over money, inheritance, or simply standing up for your own values, remember that maintaining your boundaries doesn't mean closing your heart. Boundaries aren't walls designed to keep people out. They're bridges that allow healthy relationships to form and flourish. Share your experiences in the comments below. How have you navigated family financial conflicts? Have you found ways to honor both your own needs and your family relationships? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about navigating life's most challenging moments, and hit that like button if this journey resonated with your own experiences. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the most valuable legacies aren't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch, the principles we uphold, and the positive changes we create in the world around us.